Hi, everyone. I'm Jan Mercer-Doms, the Vice President of U.S. Development with Join Mayshad. We are an ecosystem of brands for women, by women, connecting women to each other and to the companies, causes, and organizations that champion equity for women professionally and personally. Today, you're here with us watching our Women in Money show brought to you each and every week. Please make sure to check us out on our YouTube channel, Join Mayshad, and also our website, joinmayshad.com, where you can learn more about how you too can become a part of how we revolutionize how professional women network, connect, and engage and do business together. I'm incredibly thrilled and honored to speak with Regina Angeles today. Hi, Regina, welcome.
Hi, Jan, great to see you.
Nice to see you too. Regina is a global talent acquisition and executive recruiter, career transition advisor, and CEO and founder of TalentNow Solutions. Regina, this is such a timely conversation for so many of us that are watching today. As you know, we're a network of executive women and entrepreneurs and business owners. And during this time, many of us are also thinking about anything from micro shifts in our careers to launching full-fledged job search strategies as we think about what comes next in the last quarter of, last quarter of 2020. That is incredible to think about. We're in almost Q4 of 2020. But Regina, would love to get your insights on, in the last 6 to 7 months of what 2020 has become, what are some of your greatest aha moments that you've taken with you?
Well, I think my biggest takeaway is that even though it wasn't my intention to launch a recruiting business during the height of a recession and pandemic, that's exactly what ended up happening. And it's absolutely possible. I would say that the biggest things to think about when you find yourself in this situation, though, is that you really have to be very creative in terms of how you approach your markets and your contacts, and just look at everything in a different way. Because as I was saying to you earlier, I mean, March, I think a lot of people felt like the earth just was, just got pulled out from under them, right? Everything shifted. And for me in particular, I came back, I was starting second quarter thinking I had a great client base ready to go with new assignments. Just everything looked very rosy. And then I came back from a trip from Istanbul into New York, like the week before everything shut down. And what I thought was my plan for Q2 totally fell apart. So, my clients didn't need me anymore. I basically got fired from both of them because they went into immediate hiring freeze as soon as the city shut down, and they needed to figure out what the rest of their year would look like. So they weren't going to add any additional people. Everyone I talked to said they were in hiring freeze. And then I thought I was also exposed to COVID early on because on the flight that I was on, somebody had actually passed away within 10 days of our returning to the city. So a lot of, moments where I think my breath was taken away more than once. And I just had to figure out, like, okay, what is the new, how do you ground yourself, one, and then what's the plan after that? What I did that was helpful, because I launched my last recruiting firm at the height of the 2009 recession. Again, who knew that market was going to happen? But I kept thinking back to, well, what worked then, and what can I rely on? What can I leverage? Knowledge and relationships. And I think the big takeaway also in just approaching potential contacts, reconnecting with people, is just that, again, you have no idea what they're going through. So be as transparent, as empathetic, as, no hard sell, none of that stuff. Like, you really have to approach in a way that's going to be useful for both of you from the beginning. And as I watched the market kind of turn around, so my first focus, because I've done coaching for a long time, that was my first go-to. I was thinking a lot of people are going to need help navigating this type of job market, because again, it's unprecedented. It seemed like every industry was getting hit in some way. I mean, at least 2009, you could almost say it was, focused mainly on the mortgage industry and aspects of financial services, right? So we saw an entire vertical disappear, but it was fairly isolated in that regard. But this one was kind of hitting, hospitality, all the restaurant business, all the events businesses, I mean, it kind of swept up the entire economy. So what are people going to do? Because I think, again, being laid off, as the layoffs started and you started hearing the news of numbers and numbers of people, it was just really depressed. I mean, people were overwhelmed by that. Plus dealing with working from home, plus dealing with how do you get everyone situated in your family and your company working from home, how do you continue to move forward? I mean, there was a lot happening for a lot of people.
Regina, you mentioned you used a word, having empathy and understanding and just patience. And those are so key right now for sure, as we think about how we manage just our own personal lives, but then also our relationship to our employers and to our jobs and to our careers. I'm wondering, from your perspective, are employers also understanding what that means in the sense of how they tweak their recruiting and hiring and onboarding practices? Do you see significant shifts happening in how employers are stepping back and actually assessing what kind of labor pool do we really want? And how do we make sure that even before they begin, but we're respectful and tolerant and patient of that recruiting cycle itself?
I think different companies are at different phases of that. I mean, the companies I'm working with now, I think we're all in agreement that we want the process to be as transparent as possible, start to finish, for the candidates. The most horrific things I hear from candidates these days is that they'll go through these processes all through remote channels, right? Everything is through Zoom. And then, they're 5 conversations in, 6 conversations in, they get ghosted. They never hear back from the recruiter or the company, and they're just sitting there wondering what happened. I spent all this time, and I've heard that consistently at different levels, different functions. I think that is the worst right now, given all the uncertainty out there. I think if you can give your candidates, if you're actually actively recruiting right now, give them realistic timelines. It's okay to say we're recruiting now, but maybe we're estimating start dates to be later in the quarter because of these reasons. Or actually, we're going to start recruiting right before Thanksgiving because we want everyone to start January 1st.
So, Regina, it's interesting, positioning it from what companies, employers, and managing directors and really HR departments really need to keep in mind about what's different right now. Do you think the ghosting in large part is due to just company chaos internally? Is it due to companies not really understanding, to what extent they can actually bring people back in and how they do that? Is it just a much more complicated world in the sense of what it means, or are there other things at play, do you think?
Well, I mean, there are a few factors, and again, it depends on the organization. But one, I talked to my HR colleagues. They have basically turned into crisis managers for their entire organization in the past 6 months, fielding everything, work from home policies, leave policies. What if I get sick? I mean, they're like the go-to for everything. They are not trained to do that. Plus, now that, we're into the 6th month of this, and companies who are in a position to kind of refocus on hiring at least some key roles, again, it's falling on HR. A lot of them have had cuts within their recruiting teams. So they're very slim in terms of their resources. Plus, they're dealing with all the day-to-day of current employees. So, of course, things are falling through the cracks, right? Like, I mean, the number of talent acquisition professionals I know who are actively looking for new roles right now is the highest I ever remembered in any downturn. So it's a kind of a mismatch, right? And I think also, again, some of the hiring managers, I think you really have to come together, your HR partner, who your hiring manager is, your entire team. I think you all have to work in much more lockstep in terms of what expectations are each step of the process. And everyone can share the responsibility of taking the ball and getting it over to the next phase. But I think that's part of it. HR has just been completely strained throughout this time, and just honestly in reaction mode, like no time to plan, no time to really be proactive like they typically are. None of that. It's just all coming at them from many, many different angles. But I think, and again, I hate to say it, but some people too think that, oh my gosh, it's such a great time to recruit because there's so many people looking. So they kind of have that, well, we're lucky because we've got openings, so we can be a little bit almost arrogant about it. I think that might be it might be a strong word, but it's kind of that feeling. And you're like, but you know what? Again, you have no idea until you talk to candidates what the context is of what brought them to look for this role. So I think you have to take all of that into account. And again, if you and your company agree that candidate experience in good markets and bad markets is a criteria and a measurement that you want to pay attention to, then now is the time to be super, extra careful with anybody your company's talking to.
So it's interesting because I think that there was a period of time where in so many different verticals, kind of the DIY approach became very popular, and everything from booking and planning your own travel to finding your own job to, et cetera, et cetera. Now, do you see, because of everything you just said, perhaps a shift back to companies wanting to use executive recruiters and recruitment agencies more again because of the kind of the chaos that ensues internal to an organization, particularly given what you said about HR, which is all very, very, very valid. They're not trained for what they're experiencing. None of us are really trained for what we're experiencing right now.
Right. I think, well, one thing I'll say is that my firm also has a specialty in diversity recruiting, or bringing underrepresented candidates into the pipeline. So as you can imagine, given everything that's happened, that has been in huge demand. And that's actually been part of the reason why I've been able to kind of make it out of this sooner rather than later, because that's something that I've been working on for over 10 years. That's just part of the way that I work. So there is definitely a highlight on that now. I mean, again, that's a whole other topic area. I think it's very one-dimensional at the moment in terms of how people are defining diversity, which I think could be limiting in terms of what companies are actually willing and able to do, if they think really strategically, what does diversity mean to us long-term, the impact, all of that stuff. There's a ton more work to be done. I think Black Lives Matter made it another flashpoint, gave it another, level of scrutiny. But I think from a long-term point of view, I think you have to be thinking succession planning up and down your organization, not just, because again, a lot of people, and this is going to sound very glib, but, the response was put a statement on your website, hire your head of diversity, and then let's look at diversity internship programs. And you're like, you're like, okay, I've heard all of this before. But again, I think also, for companies right now, I was talking to some organizations that are private at this moment, but have plans to go public in the future. Given everything that's going on, if you have a Black Lives Matter statement on your website, but you look up your leadership team and there's no diversity there, don't be surprised if people question, well, what is actually your plan? Because you've made this position, but no one in your company is really owning it. There's no accountability. What are your metrics? Like, those are very basic things to start with.
It's such a good point. And I think that, so many times in the past, companies have operated from that checkbox mentality when it comes to everything from, their corporate social responsibility initiatives to the way in which they think about diversity, equity, inclusion, to, even engaging employee resource groups. You check it, you implement it, you check it off of a box, and we all move on. But I think now is also a moment in time where companies are thinking about knowing that they're going to be called out for continuing down that path, right? And the ways in which companies are actually embedding more of these initiatives and programs into their overall business strategy. And yet, for many of us who may be on the job market or thinking about shifting in our careers, or reinventing or pivoting or going back to corporate or whatever that looks like, how do we know if a company's a good company because they have everything they need to have on their website, versus then taking a step further and actually thinking about, the effectiveness of those programs? how from your perspective, because you talk to hundreds and hundreds of companies, how do you really know, the okay apples from the best in class apples as it pertains to just even launching a job search strategy if you want to work for a company that's actually doing good things in the world right now?
Right. I think it takes a lot of due diligence. So, I mean, a senior person in an active job search right now, I would say it's a very different process that you have to follow, right? I mean, it's beyond networking with your contacts. It's beyond getting the referrals. You really have to do a targeted search in terms of, okay, which companies are interesting, who are the key people I need to reach and why, right? And you have to build that story. So it's a little bit of a marketing and a sales exercise all at the same time, but the product is you. That's really how you have to approach it. And because I think, especially for the more senior roles, which are fewer and far between, and there's just a ton more competition, positioning yourself in the right place for that is going to take a lot of your work. You know what I mean? I think it's going to be very rare that you're going to get a call saying, "Oh, I have the perfect job for you, Jan." It's just falling in your lap, right? It's not in this market. I think, especially if you're thinking of either an industry change or something, a growth opportunity for yourself or something different from what you've been doing, you really have to create that story on what the value you bring to that organization at that time. I would also say, in terms of just culture and diversity programs within the organization, I mean, network your way in. Find people who work there, colleagues of yours who might have left there, read all the reviews online. And again, take that for what it is, because most of the time those are disgruntled folks, either current employees or candidates who didn't get what they wanted out of the process, right? But see, is there consistency there? Have they addressed it in some way, shape, or form? Is the company responding? Check out all their social media channels. What are they posting? What are they sharing? Right? And just try to get as much info if you can't talk to people directly working there outside of your interview process.
It's really interesting what you just said. So there are sites like Glassdoor, we know, that, will enable employees and potential candidates to be able to comment on, their experiences with the company. And you're right, like there are a lot of disgruntled people that just post for the sake of complaining about something. But it's really interesting to see those instances when that happens, how the company responds, right? And so how they really either take ownership even if it's just a disgruntled employee, right? But take ownership in the way that they actually try to put forth a dedicated, heartfelt response. I'm wondering, Regina, we know that there are many industries that are doing really well during this period of time. And it's the obvious ones like, health tech, fintech, anything related to direct responses to COVID. But are there other industries that we should be made aware of in the sense of where do you see the growth happening, both in terms of industry, then in terms of job function itself as well?
Well, the ones that I've been paying attention to, so within the startup space, there's a huge number of companies focused on shipping and freight. Because, okay, you can order through Amazon or whatever, but the getting it to your house, that's a whole other logistical operation. There's a ton of stuff happening there. Not the sexiest, I know, but there's tons of disruptors that are coming through that space. So that's one. I think the other interesting space, the food and intersection of food and technology. So we've seen the delivery apps, the repackaging of food, the rethinking of grocery, like that whole function, because we're all cooking all of our own meals for the first time ever, and we're so tired of it. But if you think of what's happened there, I mean, there is one blog that I follow called Food Tech Connect. And they've been covering the intersections of the food industry, agriculture, and the technology, like innovations in the space, but not only in the products that are being created, but how the customers get them, right? Huge disruption happening there. And that's if you think about it, that's an acquisition marketing business because it's subscription based, right? There is so all the mechanics of marketing that apply to other subscription-based products have to be brought there. That's not a specialty that's built there necessarily. Because remember, most food was before sold in retail. You go picked it up. You didn't expect it to be replenished on a timely, you know what I mean? Totally different mindset. So that's an interesting segue for some folks, especially like marketing, I think has huge opportunity there because it's the same acquisition problems that anyone with that model will have and face right now.
It's so interesting because there are other industries who had already launched things like that. Like when you think about the beauty industry and the gazillion beauty brands that still remain, and how many of them, through like places like Bloomingdale's or Saks or whatever's left now, I guess, out there.
Right.
Right. Like you would say, okay, it's time to reorder your mascara. It's time to reorder your cleanser. Right. And so taking a lesson from that playbook, I think is really interesting, just in the sense of those ways in which technology may have already been advanced in a certain vertical. But right. How many of us are really, replenishing our mascara in the way that we used to at this moment in time, right? And so it's interesting to see then the shifts as it pertains to advancements in other spaces that in the past we didn't think about because we're all out there in the real world together.
Right. The DTC, direct to consumer space in general, and all the different variations there, that's a growth area. These brands that are coming out of basically nowhere with a very specific consumer in mind for clothes, cosmetics, whatever it is, but they're getting to you through your Instagram feed. Click on the dot and you can buy this entire outfit right now and we'll send it to your house. So, I think that's a whole huge, it's a different way of approaching the consumer. And I think that's an area that's interesting to watch right now.
It is interesting. I think, another space that's really interesting is just the sanitization of our worlds now, right? And, the way in which we used to have, for many of us who are fortunate enough to have help around the house to help us manage our own careers, right? So everything from, Regina, you mentioned how many of us are just eating at home all the time now, right? And it's work, right? It's work prepping, it's work cooking, it's work cleaning up and just keeping the house maintained, especially given the fact that so many of us are now working still within the home as well.
Right.
So I'm wondering on a longer term, and I have no answers to this, but if there'll be innovations in that space, just in the sense of particularly for women who are still struggling with everything from, educating children at home and what that means, to managing your career, to maintaining a house, to, all those various ways in which we used to have help with in the past. We're still helpless in many of those spaces too. And so what are the companies and what are the innovations that will happen in that space in order for us to actually feel like we can take a breath again?
Yeah. Well, and that's interesting. Because virtual assistants have been around for a while. I think there might be a resurgence in that, but with maybe a broader range of responsibilities, because again, there are some things you have to figure out as a household, like what can we outsource, right? Because we are kind of being together all the time is challenging. Doing all these different activities under one roof is challenging. I would also say the other industry there that's seeing a boon is like, residential interior design and all of that stuff, because everyone's really figuring out, what does my home office space have to look like long term for this to work? Wayfair is doing really well right now building their home offices. Like,
love Wayfair.
Right. So I think that piece, carving out the space and some kind of setting where you can actually be productive. I was just reading an article yesterday about like if you've got a backyard, you can put like a self-standing shed, instead of a shed, it's like an office, right? That you can turn into your workspace, and people are actually investing in those right now. So, it's how to be comfortable, how to have a professional, setting and actually be able to think and do your work. I think that's going to be huge. I haven't heard of any interesting services yet to help that, but I know parents definitely need a lot of support right now. I'm seeing certain companies take that into account. Again, there has to be a balance, because also I think folks who are childless are feeling like they're taking on a uneven balance of work, right? They're getting pushed into things because they've got more flexibility. So I think that's a long-term conversation people have to be aware of as their companies think about, well, what will the future of work for us look like? Are some of us going to go back to the office? Are we all really going to go fully remote? I mean, there's a lot of implications for that in terms of how you run your business.
Well, that brings up also another really interesting point in how companies recruit and extend job offers too. And so, we know that, asking many different types of questions is illegal, right?
Right.
But I'm also wondering right now, could we soon see a world where, working moms are discriminated against because they can't necessarily be as flexible with hours or, work assignments or whatever that looks like? And in what ways will the best in class employers make sure that they have the safeguards in place to ensure that they have fair and equitable hiring practices just across the board, and no matter what level?
Well, I mean, just from and this is anecdotal, but most of the working moms I know are the best multitaskers out there. And I've known people who were working from home way before this happened, and how they've built their work schedule around their children's needs, throughout the day. So I think that would be unfortunate for companies to think that way, because again, if you can set specific appointments and times for your team to come together, right? There's no reason why working moms can't adhere to that schedule while also taking care of what they need to take care at home. There are very few things that you're like, oh my gosh, everything has to happen on the fly. And no one works like that, because again, we're working through our computers on these Zoom calls. You're not just going to randomly call somebody.
Well, that's right? True. So
you
interesting.
Want to expect the call.
Absolutely, because what we're finding now in our ecosystem of how we, host everything from, workshops to Zoom events to, what we call brain trust, which we bring together a small group of women around the Zoom table for conversation. We're finding that we, to the most part, have less flexibility now than what we did before when we were all kind of in the physical world together. Because exactly to your point, everything has now become a structured Zoom call meeting, right? And so you have less flexibility and less free time during the day to actually, pursue things like, lunch meetings or, coffee chat cooler around the water cooler or whatever that is, because now everything's from, 8 to 5 or 8 to 6 is pretty much taken up by Zoom meetings. It's interesting how that's changed.
But I mean, again, if you're also a person who needs certain moments off camera to actually be able to do work, you have to rethink how you set up your time. So, being a recruiter, my calls are usually taking either interviews with candidates, client calls, things like that. So my time was very structured, even pre-pandemic. So when all of that stopped, that was the hardest part for me, because all of a sudden my schedules were wide open. That was completely over. Like, how do you fill that time? That was my biggest concern, because I'm used to being very programmed. But again, one thing I've always done is, if you need an hour to walk out, take your daily walk, just get some air, program it into your schedule whenever you need, and don't overbook that time. Don't double book that time. Just give yourself 45 minutes or whatever it is to get up and change your point of view a little bit by taking a walk. So I think those are the things you have to pick up on. Like, again, really be honest about what makes you, when are you most productive? When are you not? I think the other part that's been interesting to see, because everyone's on slightly different schedules, we're not adhering to 9 to 6 necessarily, because depending what's happening in your household, right? My prime working times, to be honest, 11 to 7. So if I can do all my key meetings starting at, that's how I block my day, because I was like, that's when I'm most energetic and whatever. I have no reason to take that breakfast meeting anymore, which makes me really happy. So I think it's okay. No, and if you can make that work for you, I think it's okay to do that, because there are also people, I'm hearing of folks who are working even more than before, because their company's in many different time zones. So they start early morning to get the European. Okay, you have to figure out how to make that more manageable, right? And you're the only person who can put limits on, like, okay, can you tape that call for me and maybe I can respond at a later, or something. But you have to put the limitations on and figure out what works best for you, because this is exhausting. 8 hours a day in front of your Zoom, in your Skype calls or whatever, terrible for you.
It's so true. It's so true. You know, we know that the average workday has increased from 8 hours to 11 hours just in the last few months, which I'm sure that in New York and on the East Coast is probably 13 hours, let's get honest.
Yeah.
But I love the idea of carving out the time for yourself and making sure that that's time for yourself, and also understanding like what moments of the day are you most productive, because I'm not a morning person either. I fully admit that. And, you know, for me, keeping a later schedule feels much more pleasurable, just in the sense of then, you know, giving me other times of the day to do things that, you know, that I also need to feel balanced, you know, to your point earlier.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, you know, as we're talking about, you know, remote work, and remote work obviously is not going away anytime soon. But yet we all thought we were going back to the old world in September, and now we're in September. We're nowhere close to that. So in the companies that you work with, what's their take on how will they structure remote work to make sure that employees still feel like they're a part of something, that they still feel like they belong, that they still feel that they're, you know, engaging and perceived to be of value to the company, when, you know, often out of sight, out of mind, particularly in those instances where employers are actually going to start, you know, allowing 10%, 20%, whatever that small percentage is, back into the physical office. How do you see that panning out right now?
Well, I think I've seen it be successful if you think about it by function. So I have one company I'm working with, and we're looking at a lot of sales roles right now. So, you know, those kind of make sense. They have markets, geographic markets they need to cover, but where they physically sit is kind of the last thing on the consideration list right now, because maybe they cover that market in their other job, but worked in a completely different state, right? So I think the team is thinking about it more, okay, let's think about the markets that we need new headcount to cover, the expertise there, and then internally, how do we bring the teams together? Is it a weekly call? Is it a bi-weekly? Is it a cross-read? You know what I mean? So all of those check-ins and that kind of those status and update calls, really sticking that into making a real schedule out of that people have to participate in. And I think also, now that some offices are open, you know, figuring out, should we bring our team together live if possible, in a very, you know, on a set schedule, and just so that we can regroup on either big projects that are about to be launched, or just reconnect with each other as a team. So I think it really depends on the function, and I think each team has to decide what works best for their team, and then it kind of ladders up into the larger organization. One thing I heard that was interesting, one health tech company that I was talking to, they were rethinking what their workspace would look like. And they said that it's really going to be more like, think of a conference center or a lodge, a place we can gather as an organization where we need, you know, a place for either key meetings to happen, investors, new business pitches, that sort of thing, but also to bring our teams together to gather. There'll be some designated workspaces so people can come in if they need to get away from home and work from an office setting, but more like a conference hotel idea. You know, like, we come here for very specific functions. And I just kind of liked how that sounded, because it made much more sense, right? Because it builds in the flexibility of you're not going to need your 150 people in your company. Maybe you only have 50 workstations at any given time. So people rotate in and out and things like that. So
it's kind of like the sharing economy 2.0 when you think about it, right? Like it's the next kind of, it's like the next evolution of how we thought about, you know, some of the co-working companies that I think in the next months, if the next couple of years, are really going to struggle to really figure out how to use all the real estate that they have. Whereas the idea that you just mentioned is a lot more flexible. It's a lot more kind of pop up in a sense, right? Because you come there for whatever the reason is, and you walk away at the end of the day, but you still feel like you're a part of a community, that you're part of a team, and it still facilitates that in-person, you know, the in-personness that I think we all really crave right now too.
Yep, absolutely.
I want to talk a bit about compensation. And you had mentioned earlier in our conversation that, you know, particularly for those in senior executive roles, that, you know, those jobs obviously, you know, they've always been very difficult to come by, because as you fewer of them available as you climb your way up to the top, but then also, particularly for women, which is, Mayshad's an ecosystem of executive women, entrepreneurs, business owners. And really thinking through if companies aren't necessarily bringing people back at the same salaries that they were in the past, is there a way to offset that in the sense of how one would think about negotiating a full comps package? And then for companies, what are they seeing in the sense of, okay, so we may not be able to pay a $300,000 a year salary anymore. We can pay a $160,000 salary, but here's the offset to that. And if companies are thinking about that, what would those offsets be to warrant them being an in-demand employer?
I've actually, okay, I think at one of your events, I made a point about this. So first, don't think you have to come in and negotiate lower. Do not open with that. Whatever you were making before, expect to make something reasonably close if you're looking for a similar role right now. It just might take longer. You know what I mean? Look at total package, look at the base, think of the components most important to you and focus on those in your negotiation. I think companies are not adjusting their salaries so much thinking, oh, there's so many people looking, we can pay less and get. The really talented people are not going to take a pay cut. That's just how it is, because they know that an opportunity will come along that will fit what they can bring to the table and what this company offers. So I think, again, that's a bit of a naive approach. I think the thing that I'm trying to figure out more is, some of the big tech companies are saying, well, you can work from anywhere, but we'll adjust your salary accordingly. I think that is going to be harder to manage because, again, you're going to say, like, the roles that come to mind are like your senior data scientist, for example. That you're going to say, oh, you're moving to a third tier city, so we're going to give you comp reflective of that local. And you're going, but wait a second, this person has a PhD, all these years of experience. It just doesn't, like, I don't know how you could not, piss off that employee or that potential candidate when you're like, you're really devaluing my whole range of experience just because of the physical location. There's a disconnect there for me. Yeah. So I'm waiting to see how that plays out because, again, there's certain roles where that's just what the market will bear. You know what I mean? Like, that's just where the salaries were. I mean, unless you eliminate it completely, why would there be a huge adjustment? They're just going to go to another place that values their skill set at the appropriate competitive rate. So I think that's happening out there. But again, I think, do your homework if you are in the market right now. Study get the latest salary information you can. Talk to other recruiters. Talk to people like what are the ranges that you're actually offering for these types of roles? What's the adjustment been? And work off of that. Because again, any candidate I've seen in good and bad economies, if you're willing to take that much of a hit in your compensation just to get in the door, I would think you're a flight risk more than anything else. Because as soon as the market bounces back and the opportunities come back, why wouldn't you look? I mean, unless you already had a really great exit at a company, stock options already, everything vested, you made, you know what I mean? Like, unless you're in that situation, great. But like, I don't really hear that from most people. So think also longer term. The only instance right now that I would see that would be acceptable for taking somewhat of a pay, if you're actively changing industries, right? Like if you're a senior person in the hospitality industry and you're looking to shift because you don't know what's going to happen in that entire sector for the next 6 months and you're really worried, that might be something to consider. But I don't really think it's ever going to be that big because, again, you're a senior level person. You should have enough relevant skills that will translate in a new setting. Some of them might have to be built up more, right? But I don't think the gap is going to be that enormous.
I think that's such an interesting point, and I think something that women often forget about is that we're the beautiful sum of all of our parts from the past, right? And I think that there's an assumption that we've been socialized into understanding that if you make a change, that change may come with a cut, or it may come with, some other sacrifice or some other compromise that we have to take into consideration. I'm wondering, too, are employers thinking about benefits in different ways? Because obviously things like health insurance are paramount now, as we know. But yet we're not probably using our on-site gym memberships, and we're probably not going for yoga classes in person, and many of the other perks that come with the company cafeteria and et cetera, like no one's really
free meals. That's not a perk anymore. Commuter benefits, not a perk anymore. Going to the gym, not a perk. I think it might be interesting if companies are thinking, and this might be an idea for Peloton, bring the gym home, or that mirror thing that's hot right now. Because people want that type of service. Well, will you pay for that, like Yoga Glow or whatever the subscription member based thing is? Maybe I can use that for my gym membership instead, or whatever. So I think it's those types of things. Like, again, there's still job postings out there that say, oh, we have a great workspace, the foosball, whatever, the ping pong table, and you're like, who cares?
Beer on tap,
the beer on tap, the great coffee machine, who cares? No one's using it right now. So I think they do, those are the physical things that have to be, what can you recreate from that in someone's home if they need it? Access to that. So I think that's something that's kombucha, right?
Yeah, oh my God, we love the free kombucha at our office. That was funny. Those are producer chiming in with what this is the most. We talked a bit about, of course, us now all needing to do much more due diligence in the sense of how we think about change in our career.
Yeah.
I'm wondering also what advice you have for those of us who may be over a certain age, who really also want to stay fresh and relevant and current in how we manage our careers. Particularly for women over a certain age, I used to be 50, now it's over 40 at some point, who knows, but how do we ensure that, our resume doesn't outdate us, or a LinkedIn profile doesn't outdate us or age us, or, the way in which we present ourselves to employers, or, even honestly, for those of us who own our own business, who are, trying to attract new clients, I think this is, really relevant to how we just think about how we appear to the external world.
Well, I would say, okay, if you're in a point of transition right now and you have the luxury to kind of think about this, how are you going to ride it out in this period, right? I think now is the time to actually figure out, okay, let's look at your personal brand overall. What is the content that you're contributing? What's your voice in that space? What's your reputation? How well known are you? Because right now, we're looking at our computers all day. I think I read more now because I'm forced to, because I'm facing this screen all day long, right? So I'm actually consuming much more, and I'm paying attention to what people are putting out there much more. So if you're thinking about it that way and you're comfortable and can figure out a way to contribute to those conversations that are within your industry or other new industries that you might be targeting, how do you position yourself there? You can build your audiences right now. LinkedIn is a great platform for that. However, the other part is you also have to tap into where are the actual conversations happening right now in your function or your industry. Slack has turned into a huge community for different functions across companies. And to be honest, a lot of my new business leads come more from Slack now than LinkedIn, because there are practitioners in there saying, we need this type of person right now. Can anybody help? And you can convert that. That's a lead that you can convert into an actual new business meeting or client or whatever. But you have to pay attention to that channel. If you don't even know what that is, if you haven't been using it, that's, I think, a huge because again, those are folks in the middle of their work stream trying to get info to help them do their stuff better. So
it's like the next evolution of LinkedIn then, in a way, right? It's LinkedIn, I think, is amazing for, this is where my Rolodex is. This is how I house all my contacts. This is how I connect with people. that I may not know. But for the most part, it's also so heavy in content now and a bit of oversaturation, right? If you're not really paying attention to how you tease all of that out.
Right.
LinkedIn has evolved so much, but I think it's also overwhelming for a lot of people as well. So is it, from your perspective, is Slack the next best professional platform that we should all be taking a look at?
It depends on the function. There's some very active groups there, right? And it depends on your background and what you want to tap into. Because again, there it's completely real time. So that could also be a huge distraction because you are constantly getting messages. So how do you tease out the information that's relevant to you, right? So you have to be aware going in, like, why am I here? What am I using this for? Like, yes, I want to contribute to the community, but what do I need to get out of it? So you have to define that before you go, because again, that could be a rabbit hole that could take days and days away from you. Because you're like, look at all these people, look at all these companies I've never heard of. Like, they're so open, right? There are some channels I'm part of that it's a global audience and community that I'm interacting with. A lot of that doesn't apply to the work that I do. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting that I know it's there, but I can't act on any of that stuff, right? So again, figure out where the new tools are in your function or industry that people are actually using in a different way and adding, right? Either to identify new opportunities, to create opportunities for yourself, figure out where that is and figure out how to become part of that in some way, shape, or form. But I think, again, the quiet time, that all the reflection that people have had kind of in the past 6 months, if you really want to think about bolstering whatever your professional brand is, now is the time to actually, you have the benefit of time and all these other resources now to create a strategy around that instead of just kind of dabbling in it. Like before it was so, I'll share this article here and I'll do that. No, maybe you should create a schedule now. What's your, I want to be known for X type of content. And create it yourself, figure out who you want to share, figure out the comments that you want to make, deploy the tools that you need so that you have a constant input into that conversation stream, right? Now is a great time to put those tools into place.
That's great advice, because I think so many of us are on all the different platforms without really having the clear strategy. But to really boil it down to, I can be a part of a community, but what do I want from the community, right? And be very crystal clear on what that objective and what that strategy then becomes, because many of us see, maybe not LinkedIn, because we think about LinkedIn for business, but again, I think that LinkedIn has become a bit dilutive just in the sense of really, truly, what do we hope to get from it, other than just watching our ticker counter increase every time we add a new first degree connection.
Yeah. But actually, one good thing about LinkedIn too, their algorithms are so finely tuned. So for example, if you're actually out on the job, actively looking for a job, looking at those numbers, how many people are searching for, how many searches do I show up in? Who's looking at my background? That'll inform you, is my profile representing my background in a way that will lead me to the right next opportunity? Or am I just fielding spam, right? Am I getting calls from recruiters that are completely different industries? I have no experience. Why am I showing up? Now is a good time to test that too. Like, are the keywords that you have there reflective of what you can actually do and your expertise, right? Are you mapping it right to people who might be looking for you? So that is something you can test with those numbers and that insight. Because if you're seeing people like recruiters from all these strange industries where you have no direct experience, how am I showing up on their searches? Now's the time to refine your profile to make sure that you're actually attracting the right types of looks and the volume that you need to generate potentially that next role or introduction.
It's such a good point, because it takes it one step further from just saying, oh my gosh, 300 people looked at my profile today, but really, truly, are those the people that you want to be drawn to your profile?
Right.
Going back to what is your outcome, what's your purpose?
Right.
Speaking of outcome and purpose, I want to go back to our conversation around diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI for a second as well. And, from your perspective, how are companies now using the digital space, the digital world, as an opportunity to become much more accountable to themselves for ensuring that their hiring diverse people to the table? Or are they? Are we still too soon in coronavirus, it only being month number 6? Or maybe I'm reframing the question, like, do you think that technology in this whole digital world in which now we live will improve how companies hire through the lens of diversity, equity, inclusion?
Well, okay, so let me frame this by saying I've been talking about diversity recruiting since the mid-90s. And I don't think the numbers have gotten that much better. And I can't believe I'm still having this conversation. I think there's a lot of ways, again, in some ways, because of social and all these different platforms, it seems like it's easier to get to certain companies. But I think one thing that a lot of people forget, and this is a group that I've been kind of following for so long, the one way to kind of think about diversity the lens that I like to look at it as is that, okay, yes, we have these categories: women, African Americans, Asian, Hispanic, LGBTQ, all of this stuff. But the other underlying common thread that actually might be a much easier platform to think about is that if you think about the demographic story of all of these populations, the other common thread is a lot of them are first generation corporate workers. They don't have aunts and uncles they can call and say, hey, how did you get that promotion from VP to SVP in that company? Because I'm first generation immigrant. My dad was a small business owner. My mom worked in a corporation, but she was a chemist. So she had a very defined frame. I have nobody in HR in my family. So you kind of have to figure out your own resources. So I think if companies can actually think about that, like, oh, why is it so, like the advertising industry, for example, right? They don't go on campus. Historically, they don't. That's all about referral and who you know. Of course, they're having problems with diversity in their workforce because those students don't even realize there are these companies that do that kind of work. And then finally, when they figure it out, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm just so happy to be here. Kind of keep their heads down, figure out, you know what I mean? They stay in a very kind of focused on their specific job. And it's really hard to kind of figure out, well, what are the other resources? What are the other things I need to know to navigate this organization? I'm just happy that I was let in the door. Right? So I think if companies can broaden that definition of like training, mentorship, really understanding not just how our company works, but the broader industry, the transformations we're having. Because the weird part right now is that the entry-level workforce, hugely tech savvy. They have a worldview, right? They're listening to K-pop over here, doing TikTok over there. they're kind of like the whole world when it reopens is in my hands, basically, right? So very different view of, but how does that translate into what your business is doing? They can help you kind of create the next generation of that, but you have to let them have a platform to do it, right? So I think I don't have an answer because I'm still watching what's happening, but I think that this whole discussion on diversity right now, we're leaning way too much toward the segregations of the population and the demographics. Yes, I understand we need to measure that, but if you can kind of look at that first generation corporate experience and what the second generation is going to need, that could be a much more beneficial view, right? Because it's a broader population of people. You'll actually find a ton more commonalities. But okay, this one speaks Spanish and Portuguese. This one comes from an age, you know what I mean? Like, oh my gosh, the insights are completely different and not what we expected. But look, they're within our organization already.
That's fantastic. I love that approach. And this is the first time I'm actually, it's brilliant in so many different ways because it really does cut across the way in which I think many traditional D&I initiatives really serve to further reify the silos.
Right.
And this really breaks down how we think about those binary constructs.
Well, and I think also just completely tying, I mean, I know D&I roles are in the highest demand right now that I've ever seen. I think I said that already. But figuring out how that role actually ties to recruitment, not just how you deal with your current population, but all the way through. They should be either partnering actively with your recruiting teams, right? They should have a voice within, I mean, if you're an early stage company, right, like you're less than 500 people, maybe you don't have a huge people operation yet. One, start with diversifying your people operation. Those are the gatekeepers to your organization. That is one function that is always, for some reason, it's easy to hire just through referral. And we know what the issue is there. You hire people just like you. That is the tendency, right? So okay, start with a diversified people team, tie D&I to recruitment as well as retention, and make them work together. I mean, I don't know how many people I've talked to who are still thinking it's completely novel to be, oh my gosh, you can post, what's an HBCU? Like, what? But I've had that conversation in the last 6 months multiple times. And I said, yeah, there's actually a platform, it's Handshake, it's free. You just put the category in and they post to all of those schools. Isn't that completely novel? I mean, but again, I've been watching the space for so long, but there's that piece too. Like there's so many mechanisms that could be activated, but you need to have folks who are coming from those spaces and can kind of bring that knowledge into your organization. That's
absolutely a part. Yes. No, it's so important. I think that, in the next couple of years, we're going to see either a lot of transformation in the sense of moving things forward on so many different topics that we've talked about today, or depending upon what happens with COVID 2.0, 3.0, maybe even a setback, which would be really very unfortunate for how we think about, equality and equity within the workplace. I'm going to ask you a question. You may just have answered this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What change would you want to make within your industry right now today, if you could?
Oh, what change? Well, I think everyone is looking for, how does technology impact the actual assessment process that happens during this interviewing, right? I mean, and I say this because, again, for the candidates, a lot of the processes are exhausting. There are just so many steps. There's a presentation usually now, and it's a huge investment of time, but then you still can come away with it and you're like, we're not sure. So what are better ways to deploy either new technology or new formats that we can actually be much more comfortable with those decisions going in, right? Like, and there's some companies that are trying, everyone has to kind of do an internship or something before they come here, or give them a real project to work. But, you can't, what if your really talented person that you want to hire is working full-time someplace else and managing a household at home? They won't have time to invest in that. So there's got to be a better assessment tool or tools or process that people can be more comfortable, especially in this space. Like, we're already distanced because we're not meeting them in person, right? And you're just wondering, like, how do you kind of close that gap sooner and really know that this is the perfect candidate for you? Or counter to that, do they have enough that they think they can actually grow and bring huge potential to us? Because that's the other piece too. I think right now, that wish list of 15 attributes that they must have to be the perfect hire, it's like, oh, come on. Like, you're never going to find that person. And if you do, I mean, it's going to take forever. So I think that's the other piece. Don't hire for your company right now. Hire for what it's going to look like in 2021. Build that into the process. Educate everyone on, like, they might not have this, but they have this inkling of this other thing that no one else on our team has. Can we develop that as a group when we bring this person in?
Well,
right?
Absolutely. And I think it really also speaks to what are the new soft skills, right? We talk a lot about, understanding flexibility, empathy, transparency. But this really comes down at the end of the day to what I'm hearing you say is like an amount of trust that a potential employer can have in a candidate by building that up over time, whatever that recruitment period of time is, where they're having to jump through a lot of hoops just to be able to get to the offer. Right.
Yeah.
And so, like, in what ways can you help to facilitate the further, closing or connecting the dots in the sense of how one trusts someone to be able to say, okay, like, and again, companies, I don't know, you could probably answer this question, like, what is the average tenure on a job right now? It's not 10, 15 years, right? Like people change jobs every 1 to 2 to 3 years max now at this point.
Right.
It's not even like you're getting married for the rest of your life. You're getting married for the short term.
Right. Right. And there's some roles that are still much more defined by that. Like, oh, we just need to get to this revenue target and then it changes. But again, that exercise itself is so expensive for an organization. So I think especially working with high growth companies, I think now is thinking about, and this is a little bit harder, how do you recruit for agility? Right? Because again, at early stage companies, everyone's a generalist. You have to be ready to wear all different hats. You grow a little bit, people start to specialize. But in that specialization, you still have to factor in, okay, at some point, the company is going to be, and this job that I'm currently in is going to be bigger than what I signed up for. So where do I expand or where do I change roles at that point in time? Do I have the flexibility to do that? I think companies have to really keep asking that because the replacement of that person is still going to take you so much time and effort. And they have the historical knowledge. So do you really want to lose that? So it's that kind of give and take of, oh, can we afford to lose that knowledge if the role has outgrown them? How do we motivate them to grow to the next thing?
That's so interesting because in this period of time in COVID, just think of like how much the world has changed within 6 months, not even 6 years, but just 6 months. And I think you're exactly right in the sense of how employers will have to think about just the evolution of everything from, job descriptions to how they think about, promotion opportunities too. Regina, we have so much more to talk about. We're at the top of the hour now. Okay, this is my favorite part of each of our episodes. This is the lightning round. Okay, so actually I skipped ahead and I actually asked you one question that was a part of the lightning round. That's what you could change about your industry. But one question for you. What advice would you give today to your 85-year-old self?
To my 85-year-old self? Mm-hmm. I would probably say, I hope you're still doing tango.
I love it.
Yes. Do those drills now.
I love that. Regina, thank you so much. How do our viewers stay in contact with you?
Well, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, obviously, or my email is regina@talentnowsolutions.com.
Thank you, Regina. Thank you. You have to come back again very soon because I know that as we approach toward the latter part of Q4, I'm sure we're going to have a lot to talk about as well.
Absolutely. This was so much fun. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Thank you, Regina. Thanks, everyone, for staying with us today. I'm Jan Mercer-Doms, the Vice President of U.S. Development with Join Mayshad. Please, again, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and check us out at joinmayshad.com. See you soon, everyone.